Now, the four great sayings that we find in the Upanishads are called the Mahavakyas. Maha meaning great, Vakyas meaning saying or sentence. And we find these all throughout the Upanishads. Now, when you want to think about the Upanishads, you want to buy the Swami Nikhilananda series on the Upanishads. Now, I know that this is a lot of reading and you might need to set a few years aside. But if you're a true student of the game and you want to know the Upanishads in its true depth, then I highly recommend Swami Nikhilananda's translation. Swami Nikhilananda was pretty much a genius, and I highly recommend anything that is translated by him. He does have a smaller version of this, the Principal Upanishads, but I highly recommend this 4-part series if you're a true, sincere spiritual aspirant and student of the game. And so getting back to the Mahavakyas, we find these all throughout the Upanishads. And there isn't a particular order of the Mahavakyas, but I'll explore each one to its nth degree. Now, the first Mahavakya I want to speak about is Tat Tvam Asi. Now, a lot of people ask me, what is that Sanskrit behind you? It says Tat Tvam Asi, that art thou, or thou art that. And literally it means, like in English, that you are that. Now, we find this in the Chandogya Upanishad. Now, you might be asking, what does that thou art or you are that even mean in the Chandogya Upanishad? Now, obviously, I highly recommend you go and read the Chandogya Upanishad so you get a better understanding, but we'll go through the elements of what it means today. Now, we need to understand 3 main concepts to understand Tat Tvam Asi. Now, I speak about these a lot on the channel, but we need to explain these to get a deeper understanding. So first of all, Jiva, the ego persona system, the identity, that isolated sense of self, is the first concept to understand. The second concept is Atman. Now, Atman means undifferentiated consciousness. Now, a lot of people call this the self with a capital S, not the small self, but the big self that is identified with the ultimate reality. But a better translation is undifferentiated consciousness. So there's no identity behind this. This is where you have become identified with the ultimate reality of existence, which leads into the third concept, which is Brahman. Now, Brahman is the ultimate reality of existence, the fundamental substratum of existence, which is immanent within reality, but also transcends it. You know, we have to give it a name. It's like in Taoism where we have to give it a name, so we call it Tao. Likewise, in Sanskrit, it's called Brahman. Now, Brahman is that undifferentiated consciousness, identical with Atman. Now, the problem in our existence is that we get entangled with the jiva, the ego persona system, the identity. And so we believe that we are this person that we've been trained to become. This is what the socialization process is. So I've been trained to be Jason. I've been trained to be from this particular part of the world, speak this particular language. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that. But the real problem is when you have a belief in that identity. Because once you have a firm belief in that identity, you can cause all sorts of troubles in the world. And you can actually cause a lot of suffering for yourself. But the true nature of all of our existence, according to the first Mahavakya, is you are the Atman. You are that undifferentiated state of consciousness, which is identical with Brahman. So when we translate this as you are that, this is kind of a poor translation in a lot of ways because we need to use the word you, right? And so that again isolates you to this isolated sense of self, this person. So a better way to say it would be you are that minus the you. So there is no you there, but you are that. You are that undifferentiated state of consciousness. You are Atman, which is Brahman. And that's what Tat Tvam Asi is. But you don't want to be arrogant about this, right? I once heard a Neo-Advaita teacher when one of his disciples asked him, hey, who are you? And he said, I am that. And it came off very arrogant and with a lack of humility. Now, one thing you want to keep on the path always is humility. Now, in the modern day, we find that people are eager to claim that they are one with Brahman, which again is a dead giveaway. When you see someone say, I am that, you instantly know that they are definitely not that. So you want to keep your humility here. That should arise in you. That shouldn't become a statement that you make to other people. These Mahavakyas came to the Rishis. They came naturally to the Rishis, but the Rishis didn't go around the world telling everyone that they are that. It was an internal realization. And that's what will happen to you on the path when you follow these texts and you get deeper and deeper into nididhyasana, so that non-dual meditation on the text that we would say are beyond the stage of enlightenment. And so to get to that stage, you needed to study the Upanishads and start to understand what these 4 Mahavakyas are. So as I said, you don't want to go around and start making a grand statement, because that again is a dead giveaway, and also a lack of humility. And that's a big thing on the path in this day and age, a lack of humility, because New Age spirituality says you just need to claim that you are Brahman. But as soon as you claim you are Brahman, you are not the Brahman. The Upanishads even says, those who know the Brahman do not know the Brahman. Those who do not know the Brahman know the Brahman. Now that's a really good takeaway for everyone listening and watching, because once we make a grand claim that is associated to the ego, the jiva, the persona system, that is struggling for survival, because you're on the path, right? And when you're on the path, these texts begin to suffocate the ego. So the ego begins to slip under the door to make these grand claims that, hey, I am that. Please don't suffocate me anymore. I am that. But as soon as it makes that statement, you need to drown it more into the knowledge of the 4 Mahavakyas, the Upanishads, and the Nididhyasana texts. So that's really what Tattvamasi is. You are that without the you. And you've always been that. You've always been that undifferentiated consciousness of Atman, but you've bought into the illusion that you are this jiva, this persona system. But you are ultimately and verily the true nature of the ultimate reality of Brahman. The second Mahavakya. Now, what is that Mahavakya? That Mahavakya is Aham Brahmasmi. Now, what does this mean? Now, if we look at Aham Brahmasmi, Aham means I, Brahma means Brahman, the ultimate reality of existence, and Asmi means identity with. So what we have here is I am Brahman, if we were to literally translate it. So that means my Aham, I, identifies with Brahman. Now, Aham is an interesting word, because Aham means, in English, kind of means I making. So it's this process of the I becoming something, which becomes then the jiva, the ego persona system. So the Aham becomes the jiva, and the Aham is the I, right? Is the I making, the process of making the ego identity. But here it means it identifies with Brahman. Now, when we say I am Brahman, this, like Tattvamasi, is pretty inaccurate translation in English, because a lot of people then can think that I am God, like this way, in a very egotistical manner. But what it really means is I am Brahman without the I. So am Brahman. Like Tattvamasi, you are that without the you are that. That's what we're talking about here. Now, a lot of these Mahavakyas are very similar, but there are real subtle differences. And we find Aham Brahmasmi in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. And in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, there is a big focus, like on many of the Upanishads, that Atman, the undifferentiated consciousness, is identical with Brahman, the ultimate reality. But we often are entangled within the jiva, the ego persona system. And we become so entangled in that we forget our true nature. Now, the great Rishis, when they were contemplating and the Vedas came to them, which became then the philosophical teachings of the Upanishads. Naturally, it came to them through their deep inquiry into the nature of existence that I am Brahman without the I. They realize that the true nature of existence is Brahman alone. And the jiva is an illusion, and that is what Maya is. But don't think about Maya here in the sense that reality around you is an illusion, but this sense of jiva is the illusion. This subjectivity that you have, this person you believe you have is the illusion, because that person cuts the world up into this and that according to one's conditioning and according to one's likes and dislikes. So that is what the illusion is. And so the great Rishis knew that that jiva is an illusion, and that the ultimate reality is that I am Brahman. They realized that they were Brahman because Brahman alone exists. In the Brihadaranyaka, it even states, if a man knows I am Brahman in this way, he becomes the whole world. Not even the gods are able to prevent it, for he becomes their very self, Atman. So as you see there, someone who realizes Aham Brahmasmi, they become everything. They are then connected to everything. Their consciousness is not then isolated to their own sense of ego. They have become one with the undifferentiated consciousness of Brahman. They are it. And the illusion is that we think we aren't it. We think we are the jiva. We don't realize that we are Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi doesn't come to us because we've invested so much into this identity. And so then it takes a lot of time and upkeep to keep this identity intact because we think it is permanent and lasting, but it is impermanent. It's just a wave on the ocean of Brahman, and it will go back to be one with the ocean. And so the spiritual responsibility for us while living is to realize we are the ocean. We are Brahman. I am Brahman. But as I said, you don't want to be arrogant about this and go around telling people, I am Brahman, I am Brahman, I am Brahman. You need to keep your humility. This actually has to arise in you naturally. It cannot be something that you write in a YouTube comment or you make a grand statement about. As soon as someone makes a statement like that on a YouTube comment or online or this and that, or make it verbally to someone, they instantly are not the Brahman. They are so entangled with their jiva that the jiva is crying out for help. So it's claiming it is the Brahman, but it is not. And so if you understood that, you wouldn't even need to make a statement that you are it. Because remember, the saying Aham Brahmasmi really means I am Brahman without the I. The I would not make that grand statement. And so that's what it really means, this Mahavakya. And that's one of the beautiful things about the Upanishads and about Advaita Vedanta in general, is this focus that Brahman alone exists. But we're so caught up with our own personal problems, with the world's problems, that we forget where all of this is arising from. It is arising in the screen of Brahman, that one undifferentiated state of consciousness that we are, but we've only just forgot in this brief moment of time that we call our lives. Now, what is the third Mahavakya? This Mahavakya is Prajnanam Brahma. Now, what does Prajnanam Brahma mean? Now, if we translate that into English, it means Prajnana is Brahman, or Brahman is Prajnana. Now, first of all, Brahman means the ultimate reality of existence. Now, that is identical with Atman, the undifferentiated consciousness within you. You are that, as I've explained time and time again, and also in the first two Mahavakyas. Now, you're probably asking, what is prajnana or prajnanam? Now, prajnana means consciousness, wisdom, intelligence, or a mix of all three. It means the wisdom, intelligence, or consciousness itself. So what it's saying in this Mahavakya is that Brahman is consciousness, or consciousness is Brahman. Now what we're saying here is consciousness alone exists. Now, that's an important point, right? Because you'll hear a lot in particularly the non-dual teachings, not only in Advaita Vedanta, but also Taoism and also in Vajrayana Buddhism, Zen Buddhism, these type of non-dualist schools, that consciousness alone is real. Now, that's what it's saying in Prajnanam Brahma. They're saying that consciousness alone is real, or there is only Brahman. That's all that exists, is this non-dual pure consciousness. But the reason we don't see that is because we invest in this ego persona system, the jiva, which is under the illusion of Maya. Now, Maya means the illusion of measurement. So the jiva is in this habit of measuring between this and that, which eclipses this fundamental reality of Prajnanam Brahma, that Brahman alone is consciousness, or consciousness alone is Brahman, or Brahman is consciousness and consciousness is Brahman, or we could even make it more technical, wisdom consciousness or non-dual pure wisdom consciousness is Brahman. It is itself Brahman. Now, you probably know the word prajna. Prajna means wisdom, or this intuitive wisdom. I mean, prajna has a few different ways of being explained, but it often is explained like this type of intuitive wisdom that we all naturally have that is eclipsed. So prajnanam is that wisdom of the ultimate consciousness. So the wisdom consciousness, you could say. And so jnana also in Sanskrit means kind of knowledge or wisdom. And jnana yoga is the essence of Advaita Vedanta. So we have Prajnanam Brahma, which comes from the Aitareya Upanishad. Now, this Mahavakya was a realization of the original Rishis, who were the ones who delivered the Vedas to us, which became the philosophical text of the Upanishads. And so this Mahavakya naturally arose within the Rishis, this realization that consciousness alone exists. Brahman alone is consciousness, and all that exists is consciousness. Now, you'll see a lot of new sciences that talk about all that exists is consciousness and this and that. But then you can say to them, well, thousands and thousands of years ago, the Rishis already knew that through Prajnanam Brahma. Now, the question is, how did they know that? Well, they were so dedicated to the path, and also the nididhyasana, the non-dual meditation on the nature of Brahman, which actually became a group of texts which we call the nididhyasana texts. So you have like the Ashtavakra Gita, the Avadhuta Gita, the Mandukya Upanishad Kataka, and all of these type of texts which are classified as nididhyasana texts. And so the Rishis were absorbed in nididhyasana. They were absorbed in the non-dual meditation on Brahman. So naturally to them, the realization that Prajnanam Brahma came, that consciousness is Brahman. So Prajnanam is actually this intuitive truth. As I said, it came through the Rishis, it came to the Rishis, but it can also come to us once we down-regulate the sense of ego, that jiva within us, and realize that we are the undifferentiated consciousness of Atman, which is identical with the ultimate reality of Brahman. And so that intuitive truth is always there for us to discover, but it is often eclipsed. That is what Prajnanam Brahma is. It is that intuitive truth that consciousness is Brahman, or that wisdom consciousness or wisdom intelligence or the intuitive truth of consciousness is Brahman. There is that intuitive truth that we have. We all have that, and we can discover that through inquiring into the nature of our own existence. The deeper and deeper and deeper we go, then and only then can we come to the same conclusions that the Rishis had in delivering these four great Mahavakyas. Now, the fourth Mahavakya is Ayam Atma Brahma. Now, what does this mean? Now, Ayam basically means this, and Atma means Atman, the undifferentiated consciousness of Atman within you, which is identical with the ultimate reality of Brahman, which is Brahma. Ayam Atma Brahma. So basically what this great saying, this Mahavakya states, is that this Atman is Brahman. So if we were to take the Mahavakyas sequentially, this would be a concluding statement of all four Mahavakyas, even though we shouldn't take them sequentially. And the other three speak similarly about how Atman is Brahman in different ways. But this is like a concluding statement because this Atman is Brahman. It's never been anything else. And so often when you hear a lot of teachers, I'll say Atman is Brahman. This comes from actually this Mahavakya of I am Atma Brahma. And so this Mahavakya is pulling the rug from underneath your ego persona system, that in Sanskrit, which we know as jiva. So what the Rishis discovered was that they indeed are Brahman. The Atman within them, that undifferentiated consciousness, is identical with the Brahman. And so in the Avadhuta Gita, one of the great Nididhyasana texts, there are a few verses that speak about the great analogy of a jar. And so in this analogy, the air within the jar is the same as the air outside of the jar. And so we need to think about ourselves in that sense, right? So we need to crack our jiva because within us is the Atman, which is identical with Brahman. And so we need to crack our own personal jar so that we can merge with the ultimate reality of existence. That's how we can realize that we indeed are Brahman. We are that Atman, which is Brahman. But we can't come to that conclusion if we're holding on to this ego persona system, this identity that we think we are. Now, it doesn't mean that you will disappear completely as a person. You'll continue to function as you are in this world, but you have come to this realization, this recognition, what they say in Dzogchen Buddhism. You've come to this recognition that other people haven't come to. And so that's what makes you different from other people, is that you've come to this realization that others haven't. They still live in the ignorance of Brahman. So there's this ignorance, right? This avidya, that people don't understand that all is Brahman. It verily is Brahman, and they are identical with it, but they live within the jar. They live within this jar, and they don't know that their ultimate nature is identical with Brahman itself, because they live within the jar of the jiva. And so they're living within that persona system, which then is limited, right? Because the ego is fundamentally limited. Identity is limited. And we live within this limitation when we are all in everything. As the third Mahavakya stated, right? Pragyanam Brahma. That consciousness is Brahman. That the wisdom consciousness alone is all that exists. And we are identical with that, right? And so that's what I am Atma Brahma are saying. So when we look at I am Atma Brahma, this is a lot about how we practice, particularly in meditation, about how we perceive the world. Do we identify with the ultimate, or do we identify with our own little ego and its petty little problems? What do we identify most with? Now, it's not that you don't have to deal with your problems and this and that, but can you deal with them from a higher state? That's the challenge for all of us. But how much time in the day are you identified with your actual true nature, as opposed to this temporary wave you believe you are? And that is the challenge for all of us. That is what all spiritual aspirants are on the path to realize, that we are fundamentally Brahman. We are Atman, which is Brahman. And so how much are we identifying with that, as opposed to identifying with our petty little problems? So we need to be sincere with our spiritual practice. We need to be sincere in our inquiry. We need to be sincere in our study, and not believe we are better than anyone else, or believe we are some sort of enlightened being, but humble yourself to the great knowledge and just work on that process of identification with the ultimate reality. I was taught once a great mantra when you walk around. Say if you just go for a walk in the city, right? You're just walking and nothing's going on. And I never walk with these things in. This is a great no-no. Never walk with these things in, particularly if you are invested in the great knowledge. But so when you're walking around, right, you need to recite this mantra to yourself. All is Brahman, and I am that. All is Brahman, and I am that. All is Brahman, and I am that. You don't want to turn into a crazy person, but you want to reinforce who you truly are, and also crowd out the noise in your mind, because the noise in your mind will continue no matter how enlightened you think you are. The noise in your mind will continue. The vrittis will continue, but the volume will have decreased the closer and closer you get to understanding that you are Brahman. It won't be as loud as it is when you identify with the ego. So you need to, in some sense, unite with that Brahman, even though you're always that, right? But you need to, in some sense, keep a cultivator's mindset. I see a lot of people on the path, they don't keep a cultivator's mindset because they read such knowledge and they just instantly think they're that, right? They make grand statements like, I am that. Atman is Brahman. I'm Atman and I'm already Brahman. I don't need to worry about anything else. Until you step on their foot. And then all things change, because that's not an authentic and sincere proclamation. They are not really that. They have made a statement that they have read, and their ego thinks it's a good thing to state because it keeps their ego alive. If you understood these Mahavakyas, you would never make any grand statements about them, or that you are what it states, right? That you are Brahman. Again, the Upanishads state that those who know the Brahman do not know the Brahman. Those who do not know the Brahman know the Brahman. Now, you haven't made Brahman an object of knowledge here, right? So you haven't made it an object of knowledge, and you haven't made a statement that you are that, because who would make that statement? That would be the ego, right? The ego would make that statement that they are it. And look, all sorts of people make all sorts of excuses there because the ego is struggling to survive. And that's just the ego trying to survive. Even if someone wants to write a comment about it now, they're making an egotistical statement. So you need to, in some sense, keep that cultivator's mindset. And it reminds me of this brief passage in the Mundakya Upanishad, which states, Om is the bow, the arrow is the self, Atman, Brahman the mark. By the undistracted man is it to be penetrated. One should be in it as the arrow becomes one with the mark. I love that verse, becoming one with the mark. I love that the bow is Om, the arrow is the Atman, and the target is Brahman, which encapsulates all of the Mahavakyas, all of Sanatana Dharma, all of Advaita Vedanta, and the great spiritual knowledge, the Brahma Vidya, the knowledge of Brahman. And so I love that quote. I really love that quote. And that's how we've got to come to it, right? We need to keep an innocent cultivator's mindset, not in the sense that you don't know that you're it, right? You've come to that recognition that you're it. But what I see often with people on the path is they might come to that recognition, but it's like they fall off the wagon because they go back into watching Netflix, binging on junk food. They lose this real bodhicitta, this enthusiasm and energy for the spiritual path, because they think that they know it, but you can see that they don't truly know it because you don't see it in their own lives. You don't see them practicing it in their own lives or living it, not just practicing it, but living it. You don't see them living it in their own lives. It's pretty much a cop-out, right? So it's innocent to keep a cultivator's mindset. You meditate because that's what Buddhas do, as Shunro Suzuki said. You do these things because you love it. I love meditation. I love reading the great scriptures. Do you? That's the question I want to ask you. Do you love meditation, love reading the great scriptures more than you love watching Netflix, more than you love watching Monday Night Football? Do you love it more than that? And once you have that love and that enthusiasm, then it's a beautiful thing. You can just move through your life efficaciously and things will happen for you, but you won't be too vexed about why this and that has happened because you are moving towards the great ocean of Brahman. But we need to really sincerely think about that, right? Think about keeping that cultivator's mindset. Not in the sense that you got to cultivate all the time, but that you have an enthusiasm for understanding this knowledge at a deeper level. To understand that truly this Atman is Brahman. Not just making the statement, right? The Rishis didn't just make the statement or internally realize the statement and then their whole life just disappeared. They continued to live their lives day in and day out and would have encountered situations and circumstances where their mind needed to be applied. But as I said, the difference between them and the average Joe and Jane was this realization, this recognition that truly Atman is Brahman. Now, all we need to do is truly come to that innocently and humbly, come to that recognition, but not in an arrogant way, but in a way that your life becomes a reverberation of these four Mahavakyas. Mahavakya. Shanti, shanti, shanti.